They found her kneeling in the dust behind Gem Theater, wrists bleeding, mouth gagged with a strip of torn lace. The noon sun hit her hair like fire, and the dirt on her face mixed with tears she didn't have time to hide. Lila Hart had been running all morning, chased by men who smiled when they caught her. Inside the saloon, laughter spilled through the doors of the Gem Theater, the infamous Gem in Deadwood. But no one cared that a girl was being dragged behind the stables. Her sister Rowan screamed once. A sharp sound cut short by a gun handle. The smell of whiskey and sweat floated in the heat. A man in a black vest leaned down, his boots sinking into the mud beside her cheek. "Your brother made me a promise," he said softly, "and when a man breaks a promise, his family pays the debt." Lila lifted her eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely air, "don't hurt him." The man gave a cold smile, one that didn't touch his eyes. "That depends on you." He tossed a saddle to the ground in front of her. Dust rose. The leather was cracked, stamped with the initials E.B. She didn't understand why it mattered, but the man did. His name was Clay Rourke, and he'd built his fortune by stealing gold off government wagons and buying lawmen who looked the other way. His lip curled when he spoke, like he could already taste someone else's fear. "Steal this saddle," he told her, "from a man named Jed McAllister. You do that. Your brother walks free. Fail. And he's nothing but bones in Pactola Creek." Rourke grinned, a cruel twist pulling at his mouth. "You are now—" Lila's breath shook as she thought of her brother. Owen once taught her to shoot behind their father's barn, always saying, "Never trust anyone but family." The memory burned like the sun on her neck now, because family was the only reason she'd agreed to this madness. That night, the sisters waited behind the corral of a lonely ranch outside Deadwood. The horses shifted restlessly, sensing the fear that clung to the air. They had no weapon, no plan, only a desperate hope that two girls could outsmart a man known for killing witnesses. When Jed McAllister rode into view, they froze. He was older than they imagined. Broad-shouldered, face marked by sun and silence. A man who looked like he'd seen every kind of betrayal and survived them all. His horse, Juniper, carried the old marshal's saddle, the one with the secret they didn't yet know existed. Lila's hands trembled as she reached for the reins. Rowan whispered a prayer she no longer believed in. Somewhere deep in the forest, an owl cried once, sharp and lonely. If they stole from this man, they might save their brother. But if the secret inside that saddle was what Rourke truly wanted, would saving Owen mean losing their souls? Or would it drag all of them into a war that none of them could walk away from? The saddle was heavier than she thought. The leather creaked in her shaking hands as she tried to lift it onto the horse. Every sound felt too loud. Every second felt like forever. Rowan whispered, "Hurry up, before he comes back." But Jed McAllister had been tracking coyotes long enough to know when someone was sneaking around his barn. He moved like a shadow behind them, quiet, patient, watching the way the moonlight hit two strangers who looked more scared than dangerous. The first thing he said wasn't a threat. It was calm, almost tired. "You girls lost." Lila froze. Rowan turned slowly, her hands raised. Then a horse snorted, the rope slipped, and the saddle slid down with a thud. Startled, Rowan stumbled back. Her boot caught a root, and she fell hard on her shoulder. The sound that came out of her was half cry, half growl. Jed rushed forward, not thinking. She tried to crawl away, but his hand caught her arm, steady but firm. "Easy," he said. Her breath hitched. "Easy. It hurts." He could feel the joint out of place, knew that pain. Without a word, he slid his hand under her elbow, lifted her arm slow, and let the joint settle back where it belonged. The sound was dull, not sharp, but she gasped like lightning had hit her. Rowan gasped, tears spilling, then stared up at him like she didn't know whether to thank him or hit him. "Who sent you?" he asked. No answer. Lila just stared at the ground, jaw trembling. Jed's eyes dropped to the saddle, saw the stitches along the skirt had been cut. Inside the flap, something shiny caught the firelight. A small brass key fell into the dirt. He picked it up, turned it in his hand, and his whole body went still. The letters on the key read FNB 47. He remembered that number. Boone's number. Boone, the marshal he hadn't saved in time. the man whose saddle he now rode every day. Jed looked back at the sisters, his voice low but steady. "Where did you get this key?" Lila finally broke. Her story came out in stumbles, in half sobs and half anger, how their brother was held at a logging camp near Pactola Creek, how Rourke promised to kill him if they didn't bring this saddle, and how they thought Jed was just another rancher. When she finished, silence hung between them. Jed tossed the key into the air once, caught it again, then walked to the fire. He didn't speak for a long while. Then he said, "You stole from the wrong man, but you picked the right one to ask for help." Rowan blinked. "You'll help us." Jed stared into the flames. "Not for you," he said quietly. "For Boone, for what's right." The sisters looked at each other, unsure if they'd just been saved or tied to something worse, because whatever that key opened, it wasn't just a bank vault. It was a door to every secret men had killed to keep buried, and now Jed McAllister was holding it. Would opening it save them all, or would it burn everything left standing in the Black Hills? The small brass key sat between them, catching the glow of the campfire like it held the sun inside. Nobody spoke for a while. The sisters kept close together, eyes wide and raw, waiting to see if the older man would turn them in or help them. Jed poked the fire with a stick, slow and thoughtful. "FNB for 7, he said under his breath. Boone was chasing something big when he vanished. He had ridden with Boone years ago, back when they both scouted for the Pony Express. Guess this was it." Rowan frowned. "Who's Boone?" Jed looked up, his eyes darker than the canyon behind them. "A man I owed. Died because I was 30 minutes late. The wind moved through the trees like a whisper of ghosts." He stood, brushed the dust off his coat, and started saddling Juniper again. "Get your things. You're coming with me." Lila hesitated. Where would open this key before the wrong man does? Rowan groaned, clutching her shoulder. "You're crazy, old man. Rourke will kill us." Jed gave a half smile. "He'll try. That's different." By the time the first light crept over the ridge, they were riding toward Deadwood. The town was waking up slow, coffee smoke curling from chimneys, the sound of boots and wagon wheels mixing in the morning dust. Jed kept his hat low, one hand on the saddlebag. Lila leaned close, whispering, "How do we know we can trust you?" "You don't," Jed said. "You just know you can't trust them." At the First National Bank. The clerk looked up from his ledger, squinting. At the Black Hills Bank and Trust. The clerk looked up from his ledger, squinting. Jed placed the key on the counter. Box 47. "Need it opened." The clerk hesitated. "You the owner?" Jed's stare was answer enough. The man swallowed, nodded, and led them to the back. Inside the vault, the air felt colder, heavier. The clerk turned the lock. The door opened with a click. Inside was a small book wrapped in oilcloth. Jed pulled it out, wiped the dust away, and flipped it open. Names, dates, payments, and one name circled twice in red ink. Deputy Miles Tully. Rowan gasped. "That's the law, man." Jed's voice was gravel. "No, that's the problem." He tore out the page that showed a delivery scheduled that night near Pactola Creek. Rourke's next move. "We can end this if we're smart." Lila frowned. "And if we're not?" Jed smiled without humor. "Then we make a hell of a story before we die, outside." Thunder rolled somewhere far off, though the sky was still clear. It sounded like the hills themselves warning them that once you open a door like that, it never closes again. "So, my friend, before we ride into Pactola Creek, take a deep breath, sip your tea, and tell me where you're listening from. And if you're still with me now, hit that subscribe button, because the real storm of this story is just about to begin." By the time they reached Pactola Creek, the sun was gone behind the trees and the air smelled like rain waiting to fall. Jed told the sisters to stay close and keep quiet. The creek ran low that summer, but its sound still covered their steps as they moved through the tall grass. Down by the old logging camp, a few lamps burned through the dark. Men moved around the shacks, voices rough, the sound of bottles and spurs clinking in the distance. Lila spotted her brother first. Owen was tied to a post, bruised, his head hanging. The sight made her heart twist so hard it hurt to breathe. Jed crouched beside them, eyes locked on the camp. "Rourke's waiting for the key," he whispered. "We give him something else instead." Rowan whispered back, like what Jed reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small keg with a cracked label. Signal flares, Army issue, burns bright, loud, and fast. He said it with the calm of someone who'd lit worse things in his life. When the first shot rang out, it wasn't Jed who fired. One of Rourke's men spotted movement in the grass, then chaos. Bullets hit the trees, horses screamed. The sisters ducked low while Jed fired back with calm, steady aim. Every shot he took dropped another man closer to the fire. Lila crawled toward the post where Owen hung. She cut the rope with a broken knife, whispering his name again and again until his eyes opened. He was weak, but alive. Rowan grabbed a fallen rifle, covering them like she'd been born for it. Then Jed saw him, Rourke, standing on the porch of the shack. Smoke from his cigar glowing red in the dark. "You should have stayed out of this, McAllister." Jed fired once, missed by an inch. The bullet took Rourke's hat clean off his head. "Not my habit," Jed said. He lit a match, tossed it into the powder line, and the ground shook. The blast wasn't big enough to kill, but it lit up the night like hell had cracked open. The men scattered. Jed grabbed Owen, Lila, and Rowan, and they ran toward the horses before the flames caught the tents. Behind them, the camp burned against the black sky, and for the first time that night, Jed let the corner of his mouth lift a small victory he didn't bother to hide. "Boone," he whispered, "I paid it back." They didn't stop until the fire was just a glow behind the ridge. They rode through the night and half the next day before the fort's flag appeared on the hill. Lila looked at him, eyes shining through the smoke. "Is it over?" she asked. Jed looked east, where the lights of Deadwood flickered in the distance. "Not yet," he said quietly. "We still got one snake left to cut, because back in Deadwood, Deputy Tully was waiting, and he wasn't planning to let any of them live to see the morning." Dawn came slow over the black hills. The sky turned from charcoal to gold, and the smoke from Pactola Creek drifted like ghosts between the pines. Jed rode ahead, Juniper steady under him, the sisters and Owen following behind. None of them spoke. They were too tired, too raw, and still not sure they were truly safe. By the time they reached Fort Meade, the sun was high and the air smelled clean again. A few soldiers looked up as the group rode in, surprised by the sight. Jed dismounted and walked straight to the office, the little oilcloth book in his hand. The marshal on duty, a man older than Jed, opened it and read in silence. When he looked up, his face was pale. "Tully," he said. "We trusted that man." Jed nodded. "Not anymore." Within the hour, the sound of chains echoed in the yard. Deputy Miles Tully was brought in, eyes wide, mouth full of curses. He shouted that it was a mistake, that Jed was lying, but the names in Boone's book told a different story. And just like that, the law turned back to what it was meant to be. When it was over, Jed walked out to the porch and took off his hat. Lila joined him, her arm still wrapped in a bandage. "You could have left us back there," she said quietly. Jed gave a weary grin, the kind that came from too many roads and not enough rest. "Yeah, but then I'd still owe Boone, and I've had enough debts for one lifetime." Rowan laughed from the steps, holding a cup of coffee. "You sure you're not just tired of us following you?" Jed looked at her, eyes kind, maybe both. They stood together as the wind rolled down from the hills, carrying the smell of pine and wet earth. Lila looked toward the horizon, where the sunlight touched the tops of the trees. "What will you do now?" she asked. Jed watched the road leading out of the fort, the same road that had taken him to 1,000 places and back again. "Keep riding," he said. "There's always one more town that needs fixing, one more soul that needs saving." Then he looked at her, his voice quieter. "But maybe this time, I won't ride alone. They never found Rourke's body in the creek, but some debts don't stay buried. The camera could fade right there. But before it does, I want to ask you something. How many of us carry a debt like Jed's? Something we left unfinished. Someone we never helped. A truth we were too late to face. Maybe the lesson from the Black Hills isn't about gunfire or gold. Maybe it's about showing up, about finding the courage to stand where others turn away. Because sometimes being late costs a life, and being there on time changes everything. So if you've been riding through your own storm lately, take a deep breath, pour yourself a cup of tea, and tell me where you're listening from. And if this story spoke to you, give it a like. Share it with someone who needs a spark tonight. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next ride with me through the wild west of forgotten souls, because every story we tell brings one lost rider home.